So I guess I should start with how we met. Renee and I connected during a community trail cleanup project about 10 years ago. I was there with my landscaping crew volunteering, and she was organizing the event for her environmental nonprofit. We hit it off when she asked me to help with some erosion issues on the main trail. Honestly, it was the first time someone appreciated my knowledge about soil and drainage beyond just making yards pretty. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Built our lives together, grew my small landscaping business into something actually profitable with her help on the admin accounting side. Bought our main house 4 years ago, and last year when my grandma passed, I inherited her cabin by the lake that we've been fixing up on weekends. Fast forward to last week. Renee's family does this big reunion thing every summer. And this year, we volunteered to host at our place since we have the space in the big backyard. Her mom, brother, 2 sisters, and all their kids were coming. I took Friday off work to help set up. And that morning, everything seemed normal. Renee was being super nice. Even made my favorite breakfast and was all affectionate, which looking back was probably guilt. Around noon, we realized we didn't have enough wine for the weekend. Her family drinks a lot. So, I headed to the garage where we keep our backup stock in the wine fridge. The door from the kitchen was partially open, and I was about to announce myself when I heard Renee's brother, Douglas, say my name in this really nasty tone. He was saying something like, "Still can't believe you wasted 10 years on this broke loser. Remember when he couldn't even afford your engagement ring? Pathetic." I stopped dead in my tracks. For context, when we got engaged, I was just starting my business and money was tight. I saved for months for that ring. And while it wasn't huge, Renee always said she loved it because it was meaningful. Then I heard Renee laugh. Not like an uncomfortable laugh, but this mean laugh I'd never heard from her before. She told Douglas to trust her. She was done. Her lawyer says with the claims she's filing, she'll get everything. My business, both houses, even my inheritance from grandma, plus alimony for life. I honestly thought I was having a heart attack. My chest got tight and I couldn't really breathe right. Then her mom chimed in saying, "Good, drain him dry. Make him pay for wasting your youth." And her sister Arlene added, "Don't forget to empty the accounts before he knows. And change the locks tomorrow while he's at work." They were all just laughing about destroying me after 10 years together. The business we built together. My grandma's cabin that means everything to me. I have no idea how, but some survival instinct kicked in. I backed up silently, went outside, made some noise coming back in, then loudly announced I was grabbing more wine from the garage. I walked in smiling like nothing was wrong, and they all just switched to talking about the weather. Douglas wouldn't even look at me. Somehow I got through the next 24 hours. I kept thinking maybe I misheard or misunderstood. But then I started noticing things. How Douglas kept making these little comments about my business finally making enough to support Renee properly. How her mom asked weirdly specific questions about my grandma's inheritance and if the cabin was officially in both our names yet. How Renee kept disappearing to take phone calls outside. The worst part, I played along perfectly. I hosted. I grilled. I made drinks. I even gave the stupid toast about family being the most important thing in life. All while feeling like I was going to throw up. After everyone left on Sunday, I caught Renee in my home office going through my filing cabinet. When I asked what she was looking for, she got all flustered and said she needed our insurance papers at midnight, but I just nodded and said they were in the bottom drawer, then went to bed. I didn't sleep at all. Just laid there staring at the ceiling, listening to her typing on her phone for hours in the bathroom with the door closed. Monday morning, I called my dad as soon as Renee left for work. He's always been level-headed and practical. And honestly, I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. Dad didn't even hesitate. He told me to call a lawyer immediately. Don't confront Renee yet and start documenting everything. He also offered to come over that night to help me secure any important documents, but said not to remove them from the house in case it looked suspicious. I got an emergency meeting with a lawyer that afternoon, claiming a work emergency to Renee. The lawyer confirmed my worst fears. Renee had already consulted with the top 3 divorce attorneys in our area over the past 2 months. They couldn't take my case due to conflict of interest. She'd been planning this. The lawyer also told me something that made my blood boil. In our state, if I could prove conspiracy to defraud me in divorce, especially with family members involved, it would significantly impact any settlement. He said to gather evidence quietly and not let on that I knew anything. So that's where I am now. I've been pretending everything is normal for 5 days while secretly documenting everything, moving money to secure accounts, but not emptying anything completely. Lawyer says that would look bad. And making copies of all important papers. Renee thinks I'm clueless. Still kissing her goodbye every morning and asking how her day was. Last night, I set up a small recording device in my office after reading up on the one-party consent laws in our state. This morning, while Renee was in the shower, I heard notifications on her phone. I know her passcode, her birthday, real original, and saw she'd been texting her sister about starting the process next week. And he doesn't suspect a thing. I'm meeting with the lawyer again tomorrow to go over our strategy. I feel like I'm living in some bizarre nightmare where the person I trusted most in the world is plotting to destroy me with her entire family's help. The part that keeps me up at night is why. Our marriage hasn't been perfect, but I thought we were solid. Was it all just a long con to build up assets she could take? Dad thinks they've always looked down on me because I work with my hands and didn't go to college. Renee's family all have degrees and office jobs and think they're better than everyone. Maybe they finally convinced her she could do better. Whatever their reasons, they picked the wrong guy to screw over. I built my business from nothing, and I'm not going down without a fight. Just got a text from Renee saying she's bringing home dinner, and we need to talk about something important. Guess their timeline is moving up. First off, thank you to everyone who's been following along on Typing Truths. I didn't expect so many people to care about my situation. For those asking if this is real, unfortunately, yeah, I kind of wish it wasn't. So, after Renee transferred that $15,000 from our joint account, I was furious, like shaking with anger, furious. But I remembered what my lawyer said about staying calm and not showing my hand. When she came home with takeout that night and said, "We need to talk," I played dumb. She told me she was thinking about taking some space and reevaluating our marriage. The whole time she was saying this crap, I was just nodding like an idiot while knowing she'd literally just stolen our money. I asked her what brought this on, and she gave me some BS about feeling unfulfilled and how maybe we rushed into marriage too young. Then she had the nerve to say she'd been unhappy for years, but didn't want to hurt me. Yeah, right. More like she didn't want to leave until she could take me for everything I'm worth. The next morning, I met with my accountant, Howard, who's also been a friend since high school, to go over the business finances. This is where things got interesting. Howard found evidence that Renee had been documenting financial misconduct for months. She'd been taking screenshots of business transactions and labeling them in a folder called evidence. The kicker, many of these transactions were completely normal business expenses that she was framing as me hiding assets or spending company money on personal stuff. Howard also found emails between Renee and her sister discussing how to make it look like I'd been financially abusing her by controlling money, which is honestly laughable because Renee has always handled our personal finances. She pays the bills, manages the accounts, everything. I trusted her completely with that stuff. I moved most of my personal money to a new account at a different bank. Not all of it. Lawyer said that would look bad, but enough to protect myself. Then I called my parents and filled them in on everything. My mom was livid. Like, I've never heard her this angry. She wanted to drive over and confront Renee immediately, but Dad talked her down and reminded her we needed to be strategic. That weekend, Renee suggested we have dinner with her parents and brother to discuss the situation. I agreed, thinking it would give me a chance to see how they were all acting now that their plan was in motion. My parents insisted on coming too, for moral support. Renee tried to argue against it, but I stood firm. If her family was going to be there, mine would be too. The dinner was at this nice restaurant downtown, and it was tense from the start. Douglas kept making these little digs about how some marriages just aren't meant to last, and how Renee deserves someone who can match her ambitions. I just smiled and took it until he mentioned something about how at least now Renee can find someone who can afford to give her the life she deserves. That's when I kind of lost it. I looked him straight in the eye and asked if he thought stealing someone's business and inheritance was the right way to get that deserved life. The table went completely silent. Douglas turned red and started stammering about how I was twisting his words. My mom jumped in then, asking Renee point blank if she thought it was appropriate to be transferring money out of joint accounts without discussion. Renee looked like she'd been slapped. She glanced at her mother, who jumped in saying it was just a precaution and that women need to protect themselves in these situations. My dad, who rarely raises his voice, slammed his hand on the table and said that these situations usually don't involve family conspiracies to steal someone's livelihood. Renee's mom stood up and started yelling that I was never good enough for her daughter. The whole restaurant was staring at us. The manager came over and asked us to leave. In the parking lot, Renee's brother got in my face, jabbing his finger into my chest, saying I had no idea who I was messing with and that they'd make sure I ended up with nothing. My dad stepped between us before I could respond, which was probably good because I was about to punch Douglas in his smug face. Renee refused to ride home with me, going with her parents instead. When she came home later that night, she slammed around the house packing a bag, saying she was staying with her sister for a while. I just watched her, not saying anything. Before she left, she turned to me and asked how long I'd known about their plan. I played dumb again, asking what plan she was talking about. She just shook her head and left. The next day, I met with a business attorney recommended by my first lawyer to restructure ownership of my company. Turns out Renee had put herself as a 50% owner when she did the paperwork years ago, even though we'd agreed it would be 70/30 since I did all the actual landscaping work while she handled the books. The attorney found a way to protect the business based on some documents I'd signed versus ones Renee had signed. It was complicated legal stuff, but basically she couldn't touch most of it. Things got weirder when I was cleaning out our home office and found a voice recorder hidden in a fake plant. She'd been recording our conversations. I checked the laws in our state. Turns out it's illegal to record someone without their consent. I took pictures of where I found it, but left it there. More evidence for me. I also found a notebook where she'd been documenting evidence of me being a controlling husband. It was full of complete lies. Claims I monitored her spending. Never did. Checked her phone. Nope. Isolated her from friends. She goes out with friends twice a week. The dates in this notebook went back 6 months. This wasn't a sudden decision. She'd been planning this for a long time. The next weekend, I visited my grandma's sister, who lives about an hour away. Turns out Renee had been asking her questions about grandma's will in the cabin months ago, claiming we were updating insurance and needed the information. My great-aunt thought it was odd at the time, but didn't think much of it until I mentioned what was happening. I spent the next few days moving important documents, family heirlooms, and irreplaceable photos to my parents' house when Renee wasn't home. I also changed all my passwords and set up two-factor authentication on everything. Yesterday, Renee texted that she wanted to come by and talk about our future. She sat me down and with this fake sad face told me she wanted a trial separation to figure things out. I nodded and said, "If that's what you need, like some understanding husband." She seemed disappointed by my calm reaction. I think she wanted me to beg her to stay so she could use that against me somehow. She said she'd already found a short-term rental and would be moving some things out tomorrow. She asked if I would help her move, LOL, the audacity, and I agreed, saying I wanted to make this as easy as possible for both of us. The look on her face was priceless. She clearly expected me to fight her on this. After she left to get some air, I got a text from Douglas that just said, "Hope you're ready to lose everything, loser." I didn't respond, but I took a screenshot and sent it to my lawyer. This morning, I packed a bag and told Renee I was going to stay with my parents while she moved out to give her space. She seemed surprised again by how cooperative I was being. As I was leaving, she asked if I was really okay with all this, and I just smiled and said, "Sometimes things work out exactly how they're supposed to." I'm not staying at my parents' house, though. While Renee thinks I'm sleeping on my parents' couch, I'm actually sitting in a conference room with my divorce attorney, business attorney, accountant, a forensic financial investigator, and a PI who specializes in divorce cases. We're going through everything with a fine-tooth comb and building an airtight case. The look on Renee's face when she realizes I've known about her plan all along and have been 10 steps ahead this whole time is going to be priceless. Game on indeed. To the people saying I should just talk to her, would you just talk to someone who was actively trying to steal your entire life? So, I spent 3 full days with my legal team going through everything. The forensic accountant guy found even more stuff. Renee had been slowly moving money to a separate account for almost a year. Not enough to notice each time, like 100 here, 200 there, but it added up to almost $30,000. She also loaned her brother $15,000 last month that I never knew about from our money. My business attorney found a loophole in how the company was structured. Turns out when we filed the paperwork years ago, Renee listed herself as handling administrative duties only on one form, which contradicted her claim to be a 50% owner on another form. Since I've been the one actually performing the services and bringing in clients for 10 years, plus I started it before we were married, the attorney was able to file some emergency petitions to secure the business. While all this was happening, Renee was blowing up my phone asking where certain documents were, if she could borrow some equipment for her new place. Normal stuff that seemed innocent unless you knew what she was really doing. I just kept giving short, friendly responses like, check the file cabinet, or, sure, take whatever you need. For days after I moved out, I got an alert on my phone that someone was trying to access my email, then my bank app, then my cloud storage, all from Renee's IP address. Good thing I changed all my passwords and set up that two-factor authentication. The next day, I filed for divorce. My attorney suggested we go with a countersuit strategy, basically filing our own divorce petition with evidence of her conspiracy before she could file hers. The look on my attorney's face when I showed him the recordings of her family plotting was priceless. He literally said this was the most clear-cut case of divorce fraud planning he'd seen in 20 years. We also filed emergency motions to freeze certain assets and for me to regain access to the house, which I'm still paying the mortgage on, by the way. The judge granted both, which meant I could go back home and Renee couldn't take anything else. When I showed up at the house with the court order and a police escort, attorneys said this was necessary to avoid any claims I was threatening her. Renee completely lost it. She started screaming that I was ruining everything and that I'd regret this. The officer just stood there looking uncomfortable while I calmly collected my important stuff. Renee followed me around the house saying I was overreacting and we could work things out. Like what? You were literally planning to take everything from me and now you want to work things out. The next day, Douglas showed up at my parents' house where I was actually staying by then. My dad answered the door and Douglas tried to push past him to get to me. Dad, who was 64 but still pretty strong from years of construction work, shoved him back so hard he fell on his ass on the front porch. Douglas started yelling about how I was a manipulative piece of crap who never deserved his sister and how their family would make sure I ended up with nothing. Mom called the police while Dad stood in the doorway, not letting Douglas in. When Douglas realized the cops were coming, he left, but not before threatening that this isn't over. Dad got the whole thing on our doorbell camera, which I immediately sent to my attorney. Later that day, Renee's mom called my mom. They used to be friendly and had each other's numbers. She spent 10 minutes ranting about how I was breaking her daughter's heart and taking advantage of her. Mom finally interrupted and asked if she was aware that they had all been recorded planning to defraud me. The line went silent for like 30 seconds and then Renee's mom just hung up. 3 days later was our first court date, just a preliminary hearing. But Renee showed up with this sketchy attorney who kept whispering to her and looking worried. When the judge asked about the $15,000 transfer from our joint account, Renee claimed it was for household expenses. The judge asked for receipts and Renee couldn't provide any. Then he asked about the recording from the family reunion. Renee's attorney tried to argue it was obtained illegally, but my attorney pointed out that it was made in my own home and our state is one-party consent for recordings. The judge's face when he heard the recording. He looked at Renee like she was something gross he'd stepped in. He immediately ordered all remaining joint assets frozen and told Renee to prepare documentation of every penny she'd spent from joint funds in the last year. After court, I overheard Renee's attorney telling her that she should consider settlement options because her case had issues. She started crying right there in the hallway. Part of me felt bad for a second, but then I remembered she'd been planning to destroy my life for months, so that feeling went away pretty quick. When I got home that night, Howard texted me that Renee had called him asking for copies of business records. He told her he couldn't provide anything without my permission since I was the primary owner. She apparently got super angry and accused him of taking sides. Howard has known me since we were 14. Of course, he's on my side. The next bombshell came when my PI found out Renee and her family had taken out loans to fund her divorce. Like, they had literally borrowed money expecting to pay it back with what they took from me. Douglas had taken out a second mortgage on his house, and Renee's parents had taken a loan against their retirement account. They were all financially invested in taking me down. The PI also discovered emails between Renee and her mother from years ago where they discussed how I was beneath their family, but that Renee should stick it out until my business became profitable enough to make it worthwhile. Her mom literally told her to wait until there were enough assets to make the divorce pay off. This was 5 years ago. Apparently, Renee's family comes from money, though they've mostly blown through it, and they never thought I was good enough for her with my working-class background and lack of college degree. They tolerated me thinking my business would fail. But when it actually became successful and I inherited my grandma's cabin, they decided it was time to cash out. 2 nights ago, I was having dinner with my parents when Renee showed up unannounced. She was crying, saying she'd made a terrible mistake and her family had pressured her into the divorce plan. She begged me to drop the lawsuit and said we could go to counseling. I just stared at her like, was she serious? After everything she'd done, I told her the only thing we had left to discuss was the divorce settlement and she could talk to my attorney. She switched from crying to screaming in about 3 seconds, saying I was a vindictive jerk who never really loved her. Mom stepped in and told Renee to leave before she called the police. Renee knocked over a chair on her way out and slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. Yesterday morning, I met with the attorneys again. Based on all our evidence, they think Renee will get almost nothing in the divorce. The business is protected. The cabin was inherited, so it's separate property, and her financial misconduct means she'll likely have to pay back the money she took. I decided to move back into our house since the court gave me the right to be there. I changed the locks with the court's permission and installed security cameras. When I pulled up to the house, Renee's entire family was standing in the driveway. Douglas, her mom, her sister, all of them blocking my way. I stayed in my car and called the police. While waiting, Douglas came up and started banging on my window, yelling that I was destroying their family. The cops arrived pretty quickly and made them all leave. But not before Renee's mom started crying dramatically about how her poor daughter was being abused by the legal system. This morning, I had a meeting with the forensic accountant who found even more evidence that Renee had been planning this for ages. She'd been researching divorce attorneys from our home computer over a year ago and had searched things like how to hide money from husband and how to get alimony for life. I was feeling pretty confident about everything until about 3 hours ago when I got a call from my attorney. Apparently, Renee tried to get into the office at my business using her old key. And when she couldn't, I changed those locks too. She had a complete meltdown in front of several employees and a client. And that brings us to right now. As I was typing this update, my phone literally exploded with notifications. 97 messages and 33 missed calls from Renee, her family members, even her friends. The first message from Renee read, "What did you do? Everything's gone. The lawyer won't return my calls. Mom's crying. How long have you known? Please, God, answer me." From what I can piece together from the messages, their lawyer dropped them after finding out they'd lied about some major evidence. The judge has called an emergency hearing for tomorrow, and apparently the bank is calling in Douglas's loan since he missed payments, which means he might lose his house. I haven't responded to any of the messages. My attorney advised radio silence, but honestly, after weeks of pretending I didn't know what was happening, there's a part of me that's enjoying watching them panic now that their plan has fallen apart. So, I left you guys hanging with that bombshell about Renee and her family freaking out over their lawyer dropping them and Douglas potentially losing his house. Sorry about that. The last few weeks have been absolute chaos, and I've barely had time to breathe, let alone post updates. After getting those 97 messages, I finally replied to Renee with just one text. Talk to your lawyer. Oh wait, petty? Yeah. Satisfying? Absolutely. The emergency hearing the next day was honestly wild. Renee showed up with a new attorney who clearly had no idea what he was getting into. This guy kept asking for continuances and time to review the evidence, but the judge wasn't having it. The real bombshell came when my attorney presented evidence that Renee and her family had discussed perjury in their group chat. They had literally planned to lie under oath about my financial abuse and hidden assets. The judge was pissed, like visibly angry. He issued temporary orders, giving me full control of the business and both properties until the final hearing, and ordered Renee to account for every penny she'd taken from our joint assets. Then he referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges for attempted fraud. The look on Renee's face when he said that, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. After court, my parents suggested we all meet with Renee and her parents to see if we could resolve things without dragging this out further. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but my attorney said it might be smart to show we were being reasonable, so I agreed. We met at this neutral coffee shop downtown. As soon as we sat down, Renee's mom started in on how I was destroying her family and how I never deserved Renee anyway. My mom, who is usually super calm, slammed her hand on the table and told her to shut up. The whole place went quiet, and everyone was staring at us. My dad asked why they had planned this whole thing. Like, what was the actual reason they hated me so much? That's when Renee's dad, who hadn't said much before, finally spoke up. He said their family had certain expectations and that someone who works with their hands would never be accepted as an equal in their social circle. Apparently, they had always expected Renee to marry some dude with a trust fund and vacation homes. Not a guy who gets dirty at work and comes from common people. I laughed in his face. Like, literally laughed. Their family is broke. They act rich, but they've been living on credit cards and loans for years. My business makes more in a month than Douglas makes in a year at his corporate job. Their snobbery was based on absolutely nothing but their own delusions. Renee started crying, saying she felt trapped between her family's expectations and our marriage. She claimed she never would have gone through with the divorce scheme if her family hadn't pressured her. I just stared at her and asked about the texts and emails going back years planning this. She had no answer for that. The meeting ended with nothing resolved. On the way out, Douglas tried to get in my face again, but my dad stepped between us. Douglas shoved my dad, and my dad, who honestly had been holding back for weeks, punched him right in the face. Douglas fell back into a table and knocked over someone's latte. The manager asked us all to leave immediately. 2 days later, I got a call from my attorney. Renee's new lawyer had reached out about a settlement. Apparently, the reality of their situation was finally sinking in. They proposed I keep the business and the cabin. Renee would keep the house, and we'd split our other assets 50-50ths. My attorney laughed and said, given the evidence of their fraud, that was nowhere near acceptable. We countered with me keeping the business, both properties, and all my personal accounts. Renee would get her personal belongings, her car, which was paid off, and whatever was left in the account she'd been secretly moving money to, about $28,000 at that point. We also demanded written apologies from her entire family for the harassment and threats. They rejected this at first, but then something happened that changed everything. Remember how I mentioned Douglas had taken out a second mortgage on his house to fund their divorce scheme? Well, the bank called in the loan after he missed 2 payments. He was facing foreclosure and needed money fast. Suddenly, Renee's family was a lot more willing to negotiate. The next week, we had another settlement conference. Renee looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. Her mom wasn't making eye contact with anyone. Their new attorney, their third one now, seemed frustrated with them. We eventually settled on a compromise. I kept the business and cabin. Renee got the house, but had to refinance to remove my name. And we each kept our personal accounts. No alimony for either of us. As part of the settlement, they all had to sign non-disparagement agreements. They can't trash-talk me to mutual friends or business contacts. If they do, there are financial penalties. Douglas also had to write a formal apology for threatening me and assaulting my dad. The most satisfying part? Their loans. Renee's parents had borrowed against their retirement accounts, expecting to pay it back with my business assets. Now they're stuck with payments they can't afford. Douglas got a last-minute loan from a friend to avoid foreclosure, but he had to sell his fancy car to make it work. Actions have consequences, I guess. During the final paperwork signing, Renee asked to speak with me alone for a minute. My attorney advised against it, but I agreed anyway. I wanted to hear what she had to say. She broke down crying, saying she never thought it would go this far, and that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She asked if there was any chance we could try again. I just looked at her for a long moment. 10 years together, and I never really knew her. I asked her one question. If her family hadn't pushed for divorce, would she have stayed with me forever, feeling like she settled for someone beneath her? She couldn't answer. That told me everything I needed to know. The divorce was finalized last week. I've been staying at the cabin, fixing the place up, and taking some time to process everything. My business is doing better than ever, ironically. Turns out I'm pretty good at what I do, even without Renee handling the books. I hired a new admin person who's actually way more efficient than Renee ever was. Some mutual friends have reached out, confused about what happened. I've been honest, but not vindictive. Just said we had irreconcilable differences and left it at that. A few people who were closer to Renee have unfriended me on Facebook, which is fine. The ones who matter have stuck around. My parents have been amazing through all of this. Dad's hand was bruised from punching Douglas, but he says it was worth it. Mom has been bringing me home-cooked meals at the cabin and helping me redecorate. I'm 34, and she still treats me like I'm 16 sometimes, but honestly, right now I don't mind. Last weekend, I was at the hardware store getting supplies for the cabin when I ran into Renee's sister, Arlene. She looked like she wanted to disappear. I just nodded and kept shopping. Later, I saw her sitting in her car in the parking lot crying. For a second, I felt this urge to go check if she was okay. Then remembered she was literally part of the conspiracy to ruin my life. That impulse to care about someone who hurt you is hard to shake. I guess I got a text from Douglas yesterday. Just one line. I hope you're happy now. I didn't respond. What would be the point? They're still blaming me like I'm the bad guy for protecting myself from their scheme. Some people never accept responsibility. The weirdest part of all this is figuring out who I am now. For 10 years, I was Renee's husband. My in-laws were family even if they looked down on me. Now I'm just me. Some days that feels lonely. Other days it feels like freedom. I'm not rushing into dating or anything. The trust issues from all this will probably take a long time to work through. My friend suggested therapy, which I might try. Or maybe I'll just focus on work and the cabin for a while. Someone asked in the comments of my last post on Typing Truths if I feel like I won. I don't think anyone wins in something like this. I protected what was mine and stood up for myself, which I'm proud of. But I also lost a decade of my life with someone who was apparently just waiting for the right moment to cash out. That's not a win. It's just survival. If there's any lesson here, I guess it's to trust your instincts. If I hadn't overheard that conversation in the garage, I'd probably be homeless right now while Renee and her family enjoyed everything I'd built. Sometimes eavesdropping saves your life, I guess. Thanks for following along with this nightmare. Typing Truths. Your comments and support actually helped a lot during the worst parts. I doubt I'll need to post another update, but if Douglas shows up at my door with a baseball bat or something, you guys will be the first to know. Wow, Typing Truths family, this story shook me to my core. It's a raw reminder that trust can be shattered, but resilience is what pulls us through. I'm so grateful for this community. Your support carries more weight than you know. If you're facing your own battles, hold on to your strength and lean on those who lift you up. Keep fighting for what's yours, and know you're never alone. Until the next story, stay true, Typing Truths.